And we're back here on this Wednesday edition of InfoWars Nightly News. We're going to have a frequent contributor to the show over the years join us here in a moment, Lloyd Chapman. He heads up the American Small Business League. And then we're going to be joined by the Constitutional Party candidate endorsed by Ron Paul over John McCain in 2008. We're going to get his take on Rand Paul endorsing Mittens Romney. We're going to be talking to Chuck Baldwin coming up next here on this extended edition of InfoWars Nightly News. Lloyd Chapman's got some breaking news for us today. That's why he joins us. Lloyd, great to have you back. Haven't been on in a few months. For new viewers or people who aren't familiar with you, you've exposed some pretty big elephants in the room. Describe what your organization does and the laws that are out there that, hey, government contracts should go, part of them to small businesses, certainly American businesses, but that's not happening. You've discovered blacklist where small businesses aren't allowed to get it illegally. I mean, this is massive because it's one thing to have a big government and argue the American system, it gives contracts. Well, that's always been a danger because then that system becomes corrupt, obviously, and you've been spearheading this, and now there's a lawsuit dealing with it. So recap it for 5 minutes for laymen out there like myself, and then expand into all the new developments.
All right. Well, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, small businesses create over 90% of all net new jobs. The Kauffman Foundation did a study about 2 years ago that said that small businesses have created 100% of all the net new jobs since 1980. That means that Fortune 1000 corporations haven't created one net new job in 30 years. So here we are in the middle of the worst economic downturn in 80 years. And there's a federal law, the Small Business Act, that was passed around 1953 that says that 23%, a minimum of 23% of all federal contracts should go to small businesses. Well, that's a good idea. It was actually, I think, one of the most effective economic stimulus bills ever passed by Congress to direct 23% of government spending to the small businesses where most Americans work, that generate most of the gross domestic product, over 90% of net new jobs, over 90% of U.S. exports. If you're trying to create jobs, you've got to give the money to the people who create the jobs, and that's small businesses. Well, here's what we uncovered about 2002. I found out in 2002, by going through the government's database of small businesses, I discovered hundreds of the biggest companies on earth, not just Fortune 500 firms in the U.S., but some of the largest companies around the world were getting small business contracts. So as opposed to the 23% that the middle class, the small business, are supposed to get, they're getting maybe 2%. And there have been a dozen federal investigations that have come out. The SBA Inspector General in 2005 said that the diversion of federal small business contracts to large corporations is one of the largest challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government. And so the American Small Business League works every day to try to get the government to just simply quit giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms here in the U.S. and some of the largest companies around the world. And of course, they fight back pretty powerfully.
Well, sure. Here's an example. I saw this a few years ago. J.P. Morgan has one of the biggest contracts to administer welfare checks, Social Security, and the phone help numbers, and it turns out that's been outsourced to India. I mean, my God, we should make these people on welfare go get jobs, phased in, answering the other recipients' calls. I mean, this is crazy, but it's not really because there's a larger program with Agenda 21, the regulations, arresting the Amish, going after people with lemonade stands. The multinational corporations that have taken over the world, they don't want small businesses anywhere. I mean, that's the enemy, and you're one of the only groups out there, because you never hear about this issue in the media anywhere, saying, hey, the contract should go to American companies, and they should go to small businesses. And so, again, last time you were on, you exposed your big discovery, that there's a secret blacklist. I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah, they were going to come up with a blacklist where they could secretly blacklist those small businesses that they didn't want to work with, and they were going to exempt it from the Freedom of Information Act. This sounds like something, from a science fiction movie, but we exposed that and shut that down with your help, by the way. And the things that go on are just really unbelievable, but you're right, the mainstream media won't cover it. So
So you're a treasure, your group's a treasure. Before we get more into this, It's time for small businesses who are so busy just trying to compete and keep this country going to spend some time getting involved with you and others. What can small businesses do? How do they support you? How do they join? But what else can they do to expose this? I mean, small businesses instinctively know to put up signs saying USA, small business. We need to patronize those, but what else can we do?
Well, small businesses need to realize that most of the groups, in fact, I'll say every group that I know of that claims to represent small businesses actually are anti-small business and are funded by Fortune 500 firms. So the National Federation of Independent Business is funded by a small number of Fortune 500 firms. They've opposed everything I've done for a decade. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is funded by large corporations. The National Small Business Association is funded by Fortune 500 corporations. Every group that you would think is there to help small businesses, like the Small Business Administration, are actually just the opposite. They lobby for legislation to help large corporations, and I think they're anti-small business. So as far as I know, and if I'm wrong, someone please let me know, the American Small Business League is the only national small business organization that's not funded by Fortune 500 firms, that doesn't take money from Fortune 500 firms. So that's my statement. If anyone thinks I'm wrong, let me know, but I don't think I am.
And people should go there and join, but I mean, get your press releases out to their friends.
People, can join the American Small Business League, donate. We're filing lawsuits almost every month. I've won, countless legal battles against the federal government. And the U.S. government is the largest purchaser of goods and services on this planet. And there's a law that says they should do 23% with small businesses. That's a huge chunk of money. That should be around $230 billion a year. We think small businesses are getting maybe 1/10 of that. And if you're a small business, the government buys what you're selling. You need to look into this, go online and do some research. But whatever you're selling, they're buying it. And by law, they should do 23% with small businesses, and they're not hitting it. So it's a huge opportunity for legitimate small businesses. But we need to get the story out in the media more. So small businesses all around the country need to contact all the local media and talk to them about this, because these large corporations that are hijacking all the small business contracts, those, as you know, Alex, are the large corporations that really control, have so much control in Washington, so much control in Congress. And those are large corporations that fund the big lobby firms on K Street in Washington. So they're opposing us. So we're a small trade group, out of Petaluma, California. We're up against the defense and aerospace industry. And they just spend hundreds of millions of dollars.
But it's kind of a David versus Goliath, because I've seen you have a lot of successes. Because what's happening is so outrageous, you're more of just a whistleblower. You're raising the alarm. And I want to expand on this and talk about some of the new lawsuits. But it's not just small businesses now. These globalists state they want a post-industrial Europe, U.S., Canada, Australia, where we had traditional freedoms, to bring us to our knees. I mean, they've made those statements, Maurice Strong, Ted Turner, countless others. We saw, 3 years ago, or 2.5, $22 billion of taxpayer money in a bailout to GM to move it to Eastern Europe, Mexico, Brazil, and the biggest factories of China. So it's not just small businesses targeted, even things like GM, the heart of Detroit, the heart of Michigan, once our industrial base, the factories that made our tanks, that's being offsourced. Even the parts for weapons are being made in China now. I mean, This is really not just the establishment trying to make money. They're bending over backwards to shut down business in this country, period. Why do you think that's happening, or do you have any comments on my statements?
Well, you've got these, corporate giants here in America that are just trying to maximize profits. They're not trying to create jobs. They're not trying to help the U.S. economy. They're trying to make as much money as they can and pay as little income tax as possible. And to tell you the truth, they can do anything they want to do, seems like to me. I've never seen a bill not pass Congress that the large corporations wanted, and yet you can't get anything past Congress to help small businesses. I've been trying for a decade. Think about this, for 10 years. I've been trying every day, all day long, to get the federal government to quit giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms for 10 years. And it's impossible getting legislation through Congress because these large corporations control all the committees. But
well, if small businesses are 90% of the new jobs, and I've seen that number, the government admits that, then you'd think 90% of the contracts need to be filled by small businesses. But I mean, if you go to a government building, a government office to file something, all you see is big national vendors in there. I mean, it's a joke.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was in Washington a year ago looking at the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. When I turned to walk out of the room, I saw a big sign wall that said the Boeing Theater. And if you're in Congress to talk to a congressman or senator and you're waiting out there in the lobby, all the magazines that are there to serve Washington are full-page ads from the defense contractors. So the defense contractors control all the print media in Washington. You know, they're the major advertisers. In fact, you know, my feeling is, I bet you agree with me, that even major news outlets, national television news outlets, have all these ads, institutional ads from the Fortune 500 corporations, companies like Lockheed, Boeing, and Northrop, that we can't buy their products. Why are they advertising on CNN?
No, I've talked about that a lot. You will see ads for cruise missiles and for ICBMs and for Raptors and for and again, I see ads on 18-wheelers all over the place now. I actually shot a video on this on the road when I went to Bilderberg in Virginia a few weeks ago, and we saw it on truck after truck with drones all over them. And again, that's just propaganda, but the point you're getting at is the other side of this is it's a payoff that you're seeing all these defense contractor ads to the media, because like you said, they're not running that ad so somebody buys a Predator drone or a Raptor or an Apache helicopter or a cruise missile. This is a payoff to the media to not criticize it because of 30-year ads or defense contractor ads.
Absolutely. In fact, I was watching CNN on Sunday, and every ad is from the oil industry. It's either from the American Petroleum Institute or Chevron or ExxonMobil. CNN just seems like they're just owned by the oil and gas industry, and they won't do any stories that are critical of the oil and gas industry. I've had my story killed 100 times because a major media outlet has ads for Lockheed and Boeing running, and those stories are killed. I had a story killed by NBC 10 years ago because NBC is owned by GE, which is a major government contractor to make the jet engines for a lot of fighter jets. So there's so much collusion between these large companies. When you talk about these trucks with the ads for the cruise missiles, what the defense and aerospace industry is trying to do is get people to think that defense spending and patriotism are tied together. They're not. And people need to realize that you know, the Boeing and Lockheed and defense contractors try to wave the flag in their ads and make people think, oh gosh, we make cruise missiles, so we're patriotic, and you know, you should support us and you know, support America and be patriotic. So people need to understand defense spending and patriotism are not one and the same. And these big defense contractors are cheating our country out of billions of dollars. They're cheating small businesses out of billions of dollars. And it's just really unfortunate you can't get this story in the major newspapers, you know, around the country. But
Lloyd, I want you to get into the new news, the reason you're here today, and the lawsuits and the latest things, the latest battles, things that are on your radar screen. But before we do that, I want to bring up something that I've never asked you here on air. You started out your career, you're from Texas, working for a legendary gentleman, Bob Bullock. And you could say what you wanted about Bob Bullock, but he really did try to build things up in Texas. He did try to create jobs. I mean, I know a lot of people that knew Bob Bullock, and that was really what he was focused on in the legislature. That was a kind of an old line, type. You could even say boss hoggish. How is the old style system different from what we have today? Because, you've been doing this a while. I mean, am I wrong to say things are getting worse? They're getting more corrupt? What would Bob Bullock say about all this?
We can't say what he would say, right? You can't say it. I loved him. He was my hero and my mentor, and I learned so much from him. And he was just a wonderful person, and I think about him all the time. He would think this is all, just a load of baloney. He wouldn't use those words, but...
well, and that's the thing. Even old-line politicians weren't perfect, but they weren't as just totally cutthroat. I mean, nowadays, like you said, anything can be done. We have NATO saying they command the military, and Congress says, okay. We've got the president saying he'll kill citizens whenever he wants, and they're announcing troops on the streets and TSA. I mean, it's just so crazy. Why do you think this is happening?
Because, to tell you the truth, the public is, they're like sheep. They're just like sheep. If you go out and talk to people, as you've probably done, They don't really understand what's happening. You can't get the truth about what's happening from watching ABC, NBC, and CBS, and CNN, and Fox. That's not the truth. That's their slant. But people are naive. And I'll tell you something, and I think you probably found this to be true. The abuses that have been uncovered are so horrendous that people can't believe it. One of my biggest problems is when I call a reporter and say, hey, I've uncovered $1 trillion in federal contracting fraud, click, they hang up. They can't believe that it's true. It's just beyond their belief. I talk to people all the time that it's just beyond their belief. You talked about what's going on currently. The Russian-owned defense contractor just got $370 million worth of contracts in America that's supposed to go to small minority-owned companies. That's unbelievable. A state-owned defense contractor that sells weapons, to terrorists all around the world is getting $370 million in U.S. government small minority-owned contracts. You won't see that on CNN. You're not going to see it on ABC, NBC, or CBS. You just won't see that, right? It's hard for people to believe. But
well,
again,
exactly. In fact, we're going to play a clip of this right now since you brought that up, because I meant to play it on last week's show. I came across, well, I was looking for an article again because listeners didn't believe me that $2.3 trillion had disappeared at the Pentagon in just the 5 years before Bush got into office. The last number I saw last year, it was over $6 trillion. I always say billion. It's hard to say trillion. Just missing.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. To understand how the Pentagon can lose track of trillions, consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
And their own Pentagon bookkeepers will point it out that it's being stolen, and they're told to shut up. A lot of the investigators got killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, got fragged. We've got tens of millions in pallets of money disappearing.
That's right.
Now a lot of our weapons are being bought from the Russians. I mean, it's many of the components are made in China. That if we're going to have this big war machine, sure as hell make it here. I mean, that is law. I mean, the point is, it's gotten so crazy that people always said, Alex, the elites aren't in control like you think they are. They're out of control, robbing and stealing. Well, in a way, that's true, and I always disagreed. It's organized, but only at a certain level. They think they're organized. They're obsessed with controlling us, but who they're not controlling is themselves. I think they're going to collapse things if we don't start reversing this, but I'm ranting. You were saying that's right. You know about the trillions missing.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a story that I'm sure you're aware of 2 or 3 years ago. A military transport flew to Iraq with $12 billion in cash, shrink wrap in $100,000 bundles. They called them bricks. They lost $9 billion. They lost it. $9 billion in cash. That story should have been on the front page of every newspaper, magazine in the country. It should have been on national television, every day, over and over. Nobody even heard of it.
And by the way, it was in a few papers, but just, $9 billion this year got lost. I have family in the military. And when I brought this up, I'm talking about officers that were over there, they got very upset. One said, I don't know how you know that, better watch it. And another admitted it. Even privates, they were given money so they wouldn't talk about the generals taking hundreds of millions. The privates would be given 20, 30,000 in cash in a bag. Colonels were given 300, 400,000, $1 million. And they used it to corrupt the troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now the troops don't complain when they're told to grow the opium. So they took that money and literally, it's like in that HBO series that I watched that was very historically accurate called Rome. And they hire the centurion in one neighborhood, Caesar does, to go around and corrupt everybody. He goes, well, you have people sell out cheap. I should have you do all my corruptions. I mean, that $9 billion, because I asked family about that and also seen some articles, that was handed out, parts of it, to the troops. And then they told them later, you better watch it if you see us doing bid scams, because you took that 30,000 last year, private. I mean, wow, that is cold-blooded.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something funny. If you do research about what the federal acquisition budget is you'll find it's around 500 billion. The truth is, it's twice that. It's $1 trillion. So Congress talks about it being 500 billion. Stories in the media talk about it being 500 billion. I've seen reports, I've seen data. The head of the GSA under the Bush administration talked about it. It's actually twice that. And that's the money that's characterized as
white,
top secret.
Well, there's white money, there's black money. It's 1.1 trillion on budget, 800 billion black budget. We're talking almost 2 trillion.
Yeah. It's astonishing. Those kind of numbers, by the way, are hard for people to comprehend, and it just sounds like, some wacky conspiracy theory. Well, that can't be true, right? But
we just showed a clip where they were going, "Oh my God, we can't find 2.3 trillion." What are the numbers you're getting? If that was 10 years ago, how much is missing now?
You know what? Depending who you talk to, the number varies. But there's no accountability. Who's supposed to be accountable for that? Congress is supposed to make sure they don't do that. And when you look at the congressional committees, they're supposed to have oversight over the Defense Department. They're all taking money from the big defense contractors. They're in bed with the very people.
Why do you think Congress now could have the Secretary of Defense tell them, we take orders from NATO and the UN, sit down and shut up? How did it get to that point?
Gosh, I don't know. I think it probably got that point from people out there being uninformed and, again, just being like sheep.
All right, well, I've led you off into other areas, but you mentioned the defense contractor stuff. Give us the latest stuff we're facing, the good news, the bad news, the ugly news. You've got the floor.
Well, the bad news is that the middle class is being cheated out of, billions of dollars a year in federal funds that by law should go to the middle class, the small businesses where most Americans work, where most of the gross domestic product comes from, where 90% of all the net new jobs and 90% of all U.S. exports, small businesses, the middle class, that's the heart of the U.S. economy. That's a job-creating machine in this country. And they should be getting the money that they're supposed to get by law. They're not getting it. That money is being diverted to the Fortune 500 firms that have so much control in Washington, so much control in Congress, that haven't created one net new job in 30 years. They're shipping jobs overseas at a record rate. And again, you can't get this story in the mainstream media. They just won't talk about it. And it's, to tell you the truth, we're trying, to stop it with our lawsuits. Just a couple of days ago, we sued the Pentagon for information on contracts at Hewlett-Packard. And we're trying to show that the Pentagon is allowing these major contractors to violate federal law and take the money that's been earmarked for small businesses and divert it to large corporations. And when we ask for information that should be released to the public, they won't give it to us. So the U.S. taxpayers have to pay $500,000 to try to withhold this information. I'll win. I always win. I've lost one lawsuit in 20 years. And in 1991, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled that these subcontract reports should be released to the public. And that's the law right now. And the Pentagon knows that. So even though the courts ruled 20 years ago that they're called subcontract reports, are releasable to the public, the Pentagon's going to try to withhold them just to make it harder for us to get access to it. My guess is, by the way, they're trying to stall for time to doctor up the documents. So by the time I win this lawsuit and get the documents, they won't be the real documents. It'll take 2 years in court to get these documents, but we'll win because we always do. And but it's just so sad to see, here in California, the state has a budget crisis. They're laying off teachers and policemen. And all these federal funds that are supposed to go to the middle class to create jobs in California, Texas, and every other state are being diverted to large corporations that ship jobs overseas. And it's just so appalling. And it's
treason is what it is. And it's more than just making money. It's about bringing us to our knees. And it's like Big Agra tried to have the Food Safety Act after their big factories caused problems. And then they're exempt from a $10 tag on every chicken, but the little guys do, and they send inspectors out to harass. I mean, it's all written to shut down their competition. Now they want big pharma wants to shut down the vitamin companies, one of the few industries we have left. I mean, my God, what do these corporations think they're going to do after they've destroyed all their markets?
I think they're looking, globally. They're going to, try to do business in China and India and, around the world. but they're certainly not doing America any good. But I just wish that we could inform more people. And I think about Thomas Jefferson. Every time I talk about this, I think about Thomas Jefferson. And he said, every generation needs a new revolution. And he says, all tyranny needs to gain a foothold for people of good conscience to remain silent. And my favorite quote is, when the people fear the government, you have tyranny. When the government fears the people, you have liberty. So if you believe in what Thomas Jefferson says, one of the founding fathers of our country, we need to make the government afraid of us. See, they're afraid of guys like you and guys like me. We need to make them afraid of every citizen in the country. So right now, the people are afraid of the government. They're afraid of the IRS. They're afraid of the government. And we need to make them afraid of us.
Listen, I agree with you. People call me all the time, and I'm not some tough guy. I understand history. I'm scared of bending over and being run over. I understand the only shot. I mean, I grew up with bullies beating me up all the time. I learned when I finally started fighting back, even if they were 3-4 years older than me and tough, and I lost, I didn't get beat up every day when I got off the school bus, because they learned, oh, that guy's going to fight back.
That's right.
And so a nation of sheep will be governed by wolves, to quote another founding father, Benjamin Franklin. And we have that quote about, when the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. That's hanging up in our main entrance here at Infowars.com headquarters, because people in the military, the police, they go, you're right, but I'll get on a list, they'll come get me if I speak out. I'm like, look, the fact that you know that's the total proof, get on the list. Let's have it, let's all be on the list. We haven't done anything wrong. It's the law that the small businesses are supposed to get a paltry 28%. It should be like 80%. What percentage?
23.
Okay, 23, so it's 23, they said 28. I mean, that's pathetic. I mean, it should be a higher number. I mean, this is amazing. How do we expect to keep operating, or there to even be tax rolls, if government spending goes offshore?
Yeah, it's the public is getting immune to this. These stories, come out, and quite frankly, remember this GSA story that came out a month ago? We would have never heard about that except that there was all this video, right? So stories that are much bigger than that never get, aired because there's no video. But my favorite Thomas Jefferson quote is this one: the tree of liberty needs to be watered from time to time with blood of patriots and tyrants. And I'd like people to start thinking, who are the tyrants in this country? If Thomas Jefferson were alive today, who are the tyrants that he thinks need to have their blood watered the tree of liberty? And here's a radical statement I'll tell you. My personal belief is we don't need more young people that are willing to die overseas for America. We need people who are willing to die in America for America.
Well, I'm going to steal that from you, or at least willing to speak out and get involved.
That'll get me in trouble.
Yeah. No, that's really well said. People do need to fight here in America.
That's right.
Well, that's what I tell the info warriors watching. Folks, you're it. I mean, you're the front line. You're all there is. And when people like Mr. Chapman or myself take action and aren't co-opted, when we do resist and we have the truth on our side, we end up winning long term. And that's what's frustrating. If more of you wouldn't just say, oh, thank God Lloyd Chapman's out there, thank God Ron Paul's out there, thank God, all these folks are out there fighting. If you realize getting involved, we don't have to save the world individually. All of us doing a little bit. It's the old saying of many hands make light work.
Dissent is the highest form of patriotism. And if you think you're patriotic, fight the government. Don't let them do this. Fight the government. Get on the list. My attitude is, come get me. Come get me. I'm not going to sit here and watch the government cheat the middle class and cheat small business out of billions of dollars a week and just sit here. I'm going to do something about it. And one person can do a lot. Before I started the American Small Business League, I got a congressional investigation into rampant fraud in the small business contracting programs. I got stories in every major newspaper in the country by myself. I filed lawsuits. We need more people like you and like me to stir things up and quit being sheep and quit taking the stuff from the government. They're cheating us.
Well, that's right. I mean, here's an example. I live in Austin, million people, metro. And I read all the time, we've got state laws as well that you're supposed to spend it locally. People should be down there watching the budget items and going, hey, there's a Texas company or an Austin company. You don't need to hire, 3M to have it produced in China and brought in here. I mean, it's that simple. We've got to start holding these people to the fire, these little politicians that are bought and paid for.
It's it's sad, but to tell you the truth, I've been in the political process all my adult life. I've been around it. And the truth is that politicians at the local level and all the way up to, to the national level are pretty much owned by the people that fund their campaigns. And unfortunately, it's special interest in big businesses, right? And I had a Texas politician one time. I was giving a tour of Fort Worth in my car one day, and he told me something. He said, when you're a politician, you don't represent the people in your district. He says you represent the special interest in your district because that's where you get your money to fund your campaign. That was 1980. This guy told me that. And he was a member of the Texas legislature. But it's that way, in Congress. Well, I think the congressional approval rating right now is something like, was it 10% or 15%?
Well, it fluctuates, but last time I saw it's 9.
9. People know what's going on, but they need to do something. They need to do something about it. But
well, I agree with you because so many people are afraid to speak out. I've talked to so many national media who can't report on the Bilderberg or whatever or things. But once other people start to report, it gives them cover to do it. And that's why we saw Bilderberg implode this year and massive coverage. And I see that on so many subjects. Take radioactive isotopes in aluminum deposits and these different phosphate mines that they dump in the water and call sodium fluoride. I had scientists on a decade ago, started covering that just occasionally. Now there's news reports everywhere. It's coming out. There's radioactive isotopes in the garbage they're buying from China, but also Florida. That's the leftover garbage from these mines that they use for fertilizer that they're dumping in our water. And again, that sounds so cuckoo that a lobby would take a toxic waste and put it in your water and then call it fluoride. So we're not even debating getting fluoride out. Cut right past that debate and say hundreds of chemicals that you call fluoride, including radioactive isotopes you dump in the water. I mean, that is just cuckoo level crazy. Anyways, I've been ranting. Great talking to you, Mr. Chapman. Give out the website. And again, any other points you think are important for people to know out there?
Read what Thomas Jefferson said and listen to him. And don't be afraid of the government. Make them afraid of you. And we need to work together. And we need to stop the government from cheating the middle class out of all this small business money so we can create some jobs and save our economy.
What is the number every year? If they really got the 23% they were supposed to of the federal contracts, what is that number? I mean, the federal budget's in the
evidence I've seen shows the federal acquisition budget is around $1 trillion a year. Small business should be receiving about $230 billion. All the research we've done, all the federal investigations, it looks like they're getting maybe something like $23 billion. So small businesses, the middle class, are getting 1/10 of the amount of money they're supposed to get by law. If that money were taken away from the big corporations that don't create any jobs and given to the middle class where all the jobs are created, our economy would boom. It would boom. And by the way, here's what people can do. I wrote a bill in Congress called the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act that will redirect more money back into the middle class than anything President Bush or Obama ever thought of. The Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act. We need to get everyone to call their congressmen and senators and tell them to support that legislation. That bill will create more jobs than anything that's ever been discussed by anybody in the White House in the last decade. The Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act.
And again, some people will say, well, we shouldn't have the government controlling all the money. Well, absolutely, because this corruption comes in. But it's going on now. They should at least follow the law to not have contracts not just be Fortune 100, but also be overseas. I mean, this is a no-brainer that if the money gets spent locally, it'll go back into the economy. But if it goes offshore, very little of it's ever going to come back. And that's why, I mean, hell, they've been saying that we ended the recession 3 years ago. All the economists say it's a depression now for 5 years.
Right.
Half the restaurants I've been going to that were open for 20 years are gone. Businesses are shutting down. Almost all my family that was doing well with college degrees are doing terrible. I mean, what are you seeing in the California economy? I mean, at least in the Depression, they would admit we were in a depression.
Well, the government has a lot of power in the media. It came out during the Bush administration that they had hired the 3 biggest public relations firms in the world that were giving them, millions of dollars a week. Millions of dollars a week. So you don't get the truth out there in the mainstream media. But just this morning on television, I saw something about, they said the economy is slowing. And that's the best we're going to get. But the economy in California is suffering. The state's, suffering. We have a huge budget crisis they talk about. Again, they're laying off, policemen and sheriffs and firemen and teachers. So every state's suffering. And to me, it's not going to change until we get the government to quit pandering to the large corporations that don't create jobs and start helping the small businesses that do create jobs. It's real simple. If you want to create jobs, you got to talk to small businesses because they create the jobs, not large businesses.
Well, that's a whole other issue. I've actually, a year ago, because I've got over 30 employees, crew members, and some contractors because they choose to be contractors. I'd rather have them as employees. But I called the city and got a hold of people, and I'm like, I noticed that foreign-owned racetracks being built, they get tax exemptions and even paid for with tax money. I noticed Apple's coming here. They get, waivers on property taxes and franchise taxes and all these hidden taxes that are really business taxes. I said, I'd like to come down there and have a meeting. And they just laughed and they said, we don't really do that for local businesses. It's basically the council has to bring it up. And so basically, if I'm not Apple or I'm not whatever, and Apple, by the way, is only going to hire a few hundred people. I've seen them with big multinationals come in and maybe hire some companies 15 people. And they get basically no taxes, but then I'm here, and they've got these, every year, these franchise inspectors come by and want to, for every table, every thing I've got, they charge me a percentage, and they're obnoxious. And it's like, I'm bad because I actually have a business, a media system, but they see it as a business here in Austin, and I am a piece of trash. I mean, it's not only that they only serve the special interest, I, as a small business, am the lowest form of crap.
Well, I saw a story on television the other day where they passed a new tax where people that have been laid off and are struggling to make ends meet, a lady was making jewelry out of clay and selling it on eBay. I have a new tax to tax people like that, where ExxonMobil made record profits in 2010, paid no federal income tax. So it's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. But I learned this when I was working for Mr. Bullock. When you've got a tax burden, like a balloon, let's just say there's a balloon here, and that's your tax burden, and you squeeze one in and cut the taxes for large corporations, that burden goes down to the general public. That's what's happening in America today. The large corporations aren't paying their fair share of taxes, so that burden goes on to the middle class, the public, and they're taxing us more. And you see the reports coming out that the middle class income has gone down, I think, for like a decade, something like that. I saw a number of we've lost 40% of our wealth in 5 years. That's it. Yeah, I saw that today.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve is very proud to tell us that. Lloyd Chapman, your website again for folks out there.
ASBL.com, American Small Business League. They can also see me on YouTube.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. You're doing very important work. You're pointing out the elephant. Thank you. You're pointing out the elephant in the room. That's why they try to ignore you. God bless you.
All right.
All right, folks. We're going to go to break, and we're going to come right back after this break with our next guest and get his take on Ron Paul and more. We're going to be talking to Pastor Chuck Baldwin straight ahead.
Have you been to InfoWarsShop.com lately? Express your inner patriot with these brand new InfoWars t-shirts. Say it loud with the InfoWars Bullhorn shirt, or educate the sheeple with the Bill of Rights shirt. Grope the public's mind with the TSA shirt. And with this shirt, you can let the dark side know of the Rebel Alliance's power. All available at InfoWarsShop.com.
For more than 6 years, I've talked on the air about creating a social network. PlanetInfoWars.com is in its beta phase. We're just launching, and I want to invite all of you out there to be in on the ground level. Planet InfoWars is about people coming together, forming activist organizations, getting involved politically, hunting and fishing, gardening, dating. This is a place for people who love freedom to meet and to talk and to write and to post information. And I give you this pledge. We are not going to spy on you and sell your data to the New World Order. PlanetInfoWars.com is free, so people who love freedom can get together, connect with people who are awake and know what we're facing. Be active, organize, Take action. Go viral. Create. Contribute. Resist. Because resistance is victory. You are victory. It's waiting for you to breathe power into it. PlanetInfoWars.com.